Numbers 23:19 said, God is not a man, so he does not lie. He is not human, so he does not change his mind. Has he ever spoken and failed to act? Has he ever promised and not carried through? Let's have a chat. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. It's time for our weekly chat, and I'm so excited about this one, as I am always. But this one, the title for this video is going to be a little mix of a lot of things that I just kind of wanted to share. Number one is going to be called Trust the Prophecy, as you can tell by the Bible verse. And number two, stop using logic with God. That's the two themes of this video. Also a little bit of like, it's not what you expected. Yeah, that part too. So this video came about for many reasons. I was kind of in the moment where I would have to tell myself, like, can you trust the prophecy that God has spoken over your life? Trust what he said over your life. And one of my anchor Bible verses in life is Numbers 23:19. Wherever it feels like life is just not looking like what God says, I always go back to that and remember that God is not man, that he does not lie. He is not human, so he doesn't change his mind. Has he ever spoken and failed to act? Has he ever promised and not carried through? Y'all, I was struggling to get that Bible verse out right now, trying to do that intro, and now I just said so easily. Whatever. Anyway, yeah, that's just really what I wanted to touch on, of just trust the prophecy. Which before we go fully into that, I'm going to say this really quick. If you've ever received a prophecy, somebody has spoken over your life, number one, the very first step, always take that word and go back to God. There are people that operate in the prophetic, but there are people that you just never know. Well, I heard a story a long time ago of a woman who, she was trying to get the man to date somebody else, but that's messy. In all seriousness though, always take the prophecy back to God. Always be like, God, what do you want me to do with this? Is this what you want for my life? What are the next steps that I can take? Always start there. After you've taken it back to God, and that does seem like the prophecy over your life, make sure you trust that prophecy. Even when your situation does not look like it, even when things are like, God, what is happening? Always trust the prophecy. And I really wanted to emphasize the whole trust the prophecy thing, because I think sometimes we even get in this mindset of like changing our prayer point because our situation doesn't like look like it. One day you're praying for this, the next day you're praying for this, the next day you're praying for this, the next day you're praying for something else. It's like, do you actually trust that God would do what he says in your life? Or are you gonna keep constantly changing it to be like, well, I guess this would be okay, or this would be okay, or this would be okay. Let's say God is giving you a prophecy that, like, I don't know, he told you were gonna meet your husband and kind of gave you descriptors about what your husband, and let's not use husband, let's say for a job. Let's say God said he was going to give you a job, and you get a few options, and it's kind of like, okay, this one kind of sort of looks like it, so I guess I'll start praying that I receive this one, or like this one kind of looks like it a little bit. So it's almost like you also get in the headspace of like receiving blessings that, like, that is not the full prophecy of what God gave you, and you know that, but you're like, at least I can say God did it. Yeah, God can do that job, and that job might be cute, but God wants you to have a great thing. So make sure that you trust the prophecy, even when your life does not look like what God says it's going to look like. Make sure you trust the prophecy. And I think sometimes we try to like settle for less or change the prophecy a little bit because we're trying to see what seems attainable from our human perspective. But we have to realize God's ways are not our ways. The way God works is beyond our own understanding. Time and time again, logic was defied in the Bible. Like, logic was defied constantly in the Bible. We think about Lazarus. Lazarus was buried. Martha was like, wasn't Martha or Mary? One of them was like, you waited too long. Like, it was like time had passed. But again, logic, that's what logic was thinking, but God still brought Lazarus back up. God defies logic day in, day out. What I said, it's not what you expected. Sometimes we try to look at things that God said he's going to do from a logical perspective, and like I said, we settle for less. And I'm going to share a story about that a little bit later on. And we also try to control how God is going to manifest what he said he's going to do. Even when we go back to the Bible, and I'm going to use the story of Abraham and Sarah. God said Abraham was going to be the father of many nations. Father of many nations, the man's like Abraham was what, 100 years old? 100 years old. I think Sarah was like 99 or 90. I get the ages mixed up, but they were old. Like, if we want to think logically and how science and all this stuff works, there's no reason either of them should have been able to have a child. Like, especially Sarah, like, it's like menopause gonna come, pass, gone, like, all of it. Like, it just does not make sense logically. But again, God broke logic. And I feel like Hagar coming into the stories when they were trying to control how God was going to do it, because from their mindset, it's like, we've passed the childbearing age. This can't happen, even though God already said it's going to happen. And Hagar was the maidservant to Sarah, who they now were like, oh, how about you have a child with Abraham? At least he'll be a father that way. And I mean, all things work out well for the glory of God and all that. But again, that's another example of trying to take control of how things are going to work. And I think a lot of us really, really do that, where we try to control how the prophecy will come. And I always say, your business, God's business. What are you supposed to do, and what is the purpose for your life? Your business. How it's gonna happen, God's business. Let it be God's business. You can't worry about the how. That's simply God's business. Your situation might not look like you. You're literally looking at your life and you're like, God, you said this. My life is looking like this. Like, I dropped my hand because it's not adding up. Like, your life might look completely different than the prophecy, but still trust the prophecy. Remember that God is not a man that he shall lie. He has never promised. Now I can't remember it. Rude. Okay, now I'm going to share a story about what happened to me recently, and I'm going to explain in a way that I hope it doesn't come off rude or anything like that. But so I worked with somebody recently where I did her hair, and she had a bigger following than me. And I remember when we were working through this and all that, I was like, okay, when she posts this, a lot of like the support is going to come from her page. And I'm still very grateful, and I still got a lot of support from her page, but I thought pretty much 99% of it will come from her page. And then when I actually ended up posting up my content actually ended up doing very, very well. And that content brought up more blessing than I could ever imagine. And it was just so like crazy, because I thought that it was only gonna come from her. I felt like she was the only reason why this was gonna come forth. And she did still play a huge role in this. I'm not trying to downplay that. However, God worked in a way where I'm like, where the blessings came from my page. I hope I'm explaining this story correctly. And it was just such a moment where I'm like, it's not what you expect. And this is why I emphasize the point of don't get caught up on the how. How it's going to happen is simply God's business. Another story that I feel like will probably be better than the one that I told was, I remember a girl was sharing how she wanted to get an apartment, and God told her that she was going to get an apartment. But she put this limitation on it that like the only way she was going to get an apartment was if she was with a roommate. So she almost started to look for roommates and be like, okay, who can I live with and all this stuff like that. And the truth was, God didn't tell her that she needed a roommate. God said I was going to move you into a place. And that's just another example of like trying to control how God will make the blessing happen based on our logical mind and not based on the word of God. Like, just simply trust the prophecy, trust what God is going to say. Try to take off the little blinders of your human mind. Like, let's say God said you're going to get a car in the next 2 months, and you're like, God, my situation's not looking like you, and you're like, oh, maybe I should go take out a loan, maybe I should go do this, maybe I should go do that. You don't know how God is going to do that, and don't try to box God in to your logical mind. But that's really one of the points that I really want to emphasize, of like, stop trying to use logic with God, and stop trying to control how you think God is going to bless you, so where you almost box him in, or you try to take a testimony that like there's more waiting for you. And in my prayer is that we begin to experience testimonies that only God, and like God defied logic, and God worked, and God brought the prophecy to pass, number one, but also it was in a way that we did not expect, in a way that defied logic, to where we couldn't have even thought this is how God was going to do it, but he did it still. And my prayer is that we all get to a point where we're okay with not understanding. It says in the Bible, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. I pray we all get to a point where we don't need to understand what our situation is, but we just need to understand God and know who God is. And he's our healer, he's our provider, he's our savior, he's our protector, he's our defender, he's our, I could go on and on. Adonai, Elohim, like all the names in the Bible. Emmanuel, God with us. Ishmael, God hears us. Like, there are so many names that we can list for God, but my whole point is that we get to a point where we simply trust in who God is, and we trust the prophecy. And one thing that also kind of helped me out, and I mentioned this last week, is God really wants us to get to a point where we need to like lean on him. Like, we don't need to get it like, it's okay if we don't understand. That's the most important time to then lean on God. One of the things that kind of helps me be okay when I understand is knowing that like, if I could do this on my own, God wouldn't give me a purpose. Like, if like God, the purpose is so big that like I need God and I need to lean on him, that I can't fulfill this on my own. So I think that also helps me know that like I'm not meant to understand this sometimes. Like, it's okay if I don't understand, but know that like God understands it. And as long as God understands it, I'm good with that. And one of the last ones that I really want to emphasize is like, it's not what you expected. Most times how you think it's gonna happen is not how it's gonna happen. My prayer also is that God begins to do things in our lives that we're like, it's only God, that's how this happened. Like, but God, like, I want that to be all of our testimonies of like, God did this. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the way God works. I think he orchestrates things that are outside of logic so we can know that, like, if not for God, this would not happen that way. And I think I really want us all to get to that point and honestly receive that prayer of like, I want the testimonies of like, but God, like, you have no other reason, you have no other excuse but to like glorify him because of the way he made it happen, because it's not going to be what you expected. It's going to be outside of your mind. It's going to be outside of what you can think. Like it says, God can do exceedingly abundantly above much more than we can ever ask or imagine. God is going to bring some testimonies forth in your life that you're like, well, if you were like, oh, you did good, you're like, no, I didn't do that. Give praises to the Most High because I did not do that. Because I think that's one of the beautiful things about trusting the prophecies, that when it comes to pass finally, like, you will be like, wow, God knew exactly what he was doing, number one. And then it's just like, you have to give him praise because you know he's the one that did it. If we could, that was a point that I was trying to make a lot earlier. If we could do things by our own skills and talents, will we really give credit to God? Will we praise God the way that we should? The whole point is that we should lean on God and know that he's going to bring it to pass, even when our situation doesn't look like it. I feel like a big pillar of our faith is knowing that, like, I mentioned this in like 3 weeks, not by my works, but by his grace. Like, know that we can't do this by ourselves, basically. Like, if we could do it by ourselves, what will be the point of a lot of things? So that's just what I'm trying to get at right now. And the last thing that I'm going to share really quick, I was doing a devotional and I believe Tony Evans was the one that said this. It says, true faith acts like God is telling the truth even when you haven't seen the truth of his word. Believing precedes seeing. Just kind of wanted to leave you guys with that. But my whole point of this video is, number one, trust the prophecy. Like I said, first pray over it, but trust the prophecy. Number two, stop using logic with God. Stop trying to box God into how you think he's going to work. That you almost like, you're in the way of God. It's like, girl, move out the way. Move out the way. Like, move out of the way so God can work. And I think this is when I think about, quick thing, the story of Esther. The God already knew he could use her. Like, the favor was already on her life. The prophecy was already on her life. Whether or not she wanted to be used was the issue. And that's why I love that whole Esther, like the 4:16, somewhere around there, where Mordecai once said that you were made for a time like this. And then he also said that, like, God is going to bring this prophecy to pass one way or another. Whether or not he uses you is like the issue. Like, God is going to bring this to pass. So sometimes we really need to like get out of the way so God can use us. And that's why she went on that whole 3-day fast of like, let me go get brave. Let me go prepare. Yeah, that's my whole point of like, sometimes really stop trying to control how God is going to work in your life and just get out of the way and let him do what he has to do. And then number 3, it's not what you expected. God is going to bless you in a way that you have no other option but to give him praise and to bring glory to his name, because your testimony will be, only God could have done this. Only God could have brought this to pass. And that's my prayer for all of us, truly, is that we have those testimonies of like, but God, because those testimonies, I feel like they're just the best testimonies because there's so much story there. There's so much like turmoil. It's like a whole whatever. And then it's just like, but God. And I love that part about it. So yeah. Anyway, that's it from me, y'all. I will see you in the next video, and bye. Because Lazarus was in the grave and God brought him there. His ways are not our ways.